Could Farage really be the shape of things to come? I've just been watching the Times radio interview with Andrew Neil, and the reality is that the most recent YouGov poll, that since Farage said that he was standing, puts Reform UK at 17% and the Conservatives at 18%. They're doing it in a slightly different way. So if they were doing it in the same way that they've been doing it 2 weeks ago, apparently Reform would be at 18% or perhaps higher. So they're weighting things according to the number of seats, I believe. But there's already a notable shift in voter sentiment that's registered in that poll. But nevertheless, you have to take it at you have to look at the broader context and the electromechanics. And the electromechanics polls are just a snapshot of public opinion at a given time. They can fluctuate. And while Reform UK's rise today is significant, it's essential to see it as part of a trend or a tray that needs to be sustained over multiple polls and across different demographics across our society. And I'm not sure that is really sustainable. It's the same problem that faces the Liberal the Lib Dems when they're good in one area, they may not be good across the country. So to have a 20% rise, to be scoring 20% in the polls doesn't mean you're going to get lots of seats. In fact, at 19%, at 17%, because of the first past the post system, Reform are not going to get any seats at all. Even if the Conservatives are at 19%, they're still going to get a significant number of seats because they've already got them. So the likelihood at 17, 18, 19% of Reform winning even a single seat, even Farage's seat, under first past the post is very, very slim. Reform's voter base is disillusioned Conservative voters, and that is going to weaken the Conservative Party. However, unless Reform UK can appeal to a broader spectrum of voters, its impact on July the 4th will be insignificant. It will simply fracture the right-wing vote, the tufty Conservatives. And Farage's influence, his potential return to frontline politics, might galvanise Reform to make that break, to break into mainstream thought rather than simply steal lackluster right-wing Tufton Street Conservatives. It might be enough to mobilise support across the UK, rather like it did with UKIP, but it needs to break into that Labour red wall if it's going to do anything. It needs to break into the Liberal vote if it's going to do anything. The Reform success depends on maintaining momentum, translating popular support, the polling, into electoral victories in the constituencies within the constraints of the first past the post system. And that means it really needs to take a lesson from the Lib Dems. I'm sure Farage wouldn't like to be told that. In order to be successful, Reform needs to strategically target its successes, its key votes. It needs to have an effective leadership. And yesterday, Andrew Neil dismissed Richard Tice as an amateur. He's quite right. And so is Farage from that point of view. Farage is not an effective leader for Reform. He's an effective leader for himself. He's a compelling candidate, but it's not a compelling campaign. And already yesterday, he was dismissing bits in the proposed manifesto on the hoof. And that might resonate with his small core followers, the Farage follies, but it doesn't resonate with the broader electorate. And to ensure that reform is successful, there will need to be a structural change of the first past the post system. And that would give significant parliamentary representation. It's unlikely without a significant increase in support. If the polling pushed reform in the next week or so towards 30%, that will change things. As Andrew Neil has said, this doesn't affect Labour's landslide. I'm not as inclined as Andrew Neil to think that even now Labour is going to be getting more than just a tidy a tidy majority. I don't think it's going to get a landslide. As I've said all along, the first past the post system prevents that, and it would require a swing the like of which has not been seen in modern history. And I don't think that, despite the misfortunes of the Conservative Party, despite the distrust it has built up, despite the contempt with which many former Conservative voters look upon the present Conservative government, despite that, I don't think Labour has done enough to engineer a swing towards Labour. It's a swing away from the Conservatives rather than a swing towards Labour. That I don't think justifies the sort of landslide that Tony Blair had. With Tony Blair, he went into the election with an image that Labour was offering something, that Labour had changed and had made itself the party of government. Keir Starmer is trying to replicate that by saying Labour has changed. He has changed Labour. But he hasn't offered anything. And that, I think, is the significant thing. And simply standing up and saying, liar, lies, lie, lied 7 times about Rishi Sunak is not enough to convince the public that Labour have substance rather than just rhetoric to offer as a difference to what the Conservative Party has been offering, has been doing in power as it governed. I think this is a protest vote rather than a vote for Labour. I think it's a protest vote in much the same way as the referendum was a protest vote about our system and about the feeling of oppression that many people sensed. If the referendum was about rejecting Brexit, there would have been a significantly more vocal demonstration in the vote. It simply scraped through. If you turn that into a parliamentary majority, it simply scrapes through. It's a protest vote rather than a vote for Labour. And in the same way, I will go to my grave saying that the referendum was a protest vote rather than a vote specifically to leave Europe. It's a vote to leave Europe by accident, and that needs turning round. But that's not really the purpose of what I'm doing now. The purpose of what I'm doing is to say how I think reform is on the up. And reform would, of course, be waving their Brexit flags as much as they possibly can.